My reflection in the fitting room mirror looked unfamiliar. At 68, Eleanor may have had long since gotten used to figure-forgiving outfits. For decades, she had chosen practical pants and loose blouses, clothes that were comfortable for her accounting work, not for showing off. But today, she stood in front of the mirror in a shimmering sapphire blue gown with an intricate silver brooch that shimmered, catching the light, an ensemble that cost more than she usually spent on clothes in 6 months. "It suits you exceptionally well, Mrs. Maeve," the store assistant, Brenda, a woman with a practiced, reassuring smile, chimed, gracefully adjusting the delicate folds in the gown's skirt. "The color truly makes your eyes sparkle." Eleanor nodded, not accustomed to such effusive compliments, her own inner critic often louder than any external praise. Today, though, she desperately wanted to believe them. After all, she was preparing for the wedding of her only son, Daniel. Daniel, now 43, would be marrying his fiancée, Serafina, in just over 2 weeks. Despite their undeniably complicated relationship, Eleanor wanted to look dignified, perhaps even radiant. A small, hopeful part of her wished that by presenting herself in this new, elegant light, some of the old frostiness between them might melt away. "I'll take it," she said, the words feeling surprisingly firm, heading back to the spacious fitting room to change. While Brenda processed the significant purchase, Eleanor found herself staring out the large window at the bustling streets of Charlotte, North Carolina. How peculiar that in all her long life, spanning nearly 7 decades, she'd never truly ventured far from this city. She'd opened her first successful accounting firm here, navigated the profound grief of burying her late husband, Robert, here, and tirelessly raised her son, Daniel, within its familiar boundaries. Now, Daniel was getting married, perhaps the last truly major milestone in her life that felt inextricably linked to remaining in Charlotte. A strange mix of nostalgia and restless yearning stirred within her. After paying with her sleek black card, the weight of the transaction settling lightly in her purse, Eleanor walked out of the store with the voluminous garment bag swinging gently in her hand. Her trusty, albeit somewhat aged, Ford Fusion was waiting patiently in the sun-drenched parking lot. As she slid behind the wheel, the worn leather familiar beneath her fingertips, she glanced at her wristwatch. It was precisely 2:10 in the afternoon. She had a scheduled appointment with the prestigious Everbloom Events wedding agency at 3 p.m. The agency's office was nestled within one of the gleaming new business towers on the city's burgeoning uptown fringe, a vast, minimalist space adorned with pristine white walls and an almost overwhelming array of photographs depicting impossibly perfect, beaming couples. It felt a world away from her practical, down-to-earth existence. A meticulously composed young woman named Chelsea, with a smile that seemed permanently affixed, ushered Eleanor into a private meeting room. "Hello, Mrs. Maeve, we've prepared all the comprehensive paperwork you requested," Chelsea chirped, laying out several thick folders with an almost theatrical flourish across the polished mahogany table. "Are you absolutely certain you wish to keep your involvement confidential?" Eleanor nodded, the action resolute. This secrecy had been a non-negotiable prerequisite from their very first conversation. "Yes, Daniel and Serafina cannot know that I am covering the vast majority of the expenses. They are under the impression that Serafina's parents are generously handling everything." Chelsea's perfectly arched eyebrows furrowed slightly, a flicker of genuine bewilderment crossing her features. This clandestine philanthropy was clearly an anomaly in her professional experience. Typically, affluent parents vied for the spotlight, eager to flaunt their generosity, not conceal it. "It's simply that my son and I have a complicated relationship," Eleanor explained, though she knew the brevity of her explanation barely scratched the surface of decades of subtle estrangement. She spared Chelsea the painful narrative of how, after her beloved husband, Robert, had passed away unexpectedly 17 years prior, she had single-handedly, with grit and relentless determination, transformed a struggling local accounting practice into a highly respected, multi-branch firm. She didn't elaborate on how Daniel, upon entering an elite university, had gradually begun to perceive her humble origins and practical nature as an embarrassment, how he had grown increasingly distant over the years, seemingly convinced that she was too unrefined or uneducated for his burgeoning social circle and ambitious career aspirations. Nor did she mention the bitter irony that when she finally sold her highly successful accounting chain 5 years ago for a substantial sum, a truly life-changing figure, Daniel's interest in her had been abruptly, almost jarringly, rekindled. But, as she painfully realized, it was an interest solely in her newfound financial liquidity, not in her as his mother. This concealed contribution was her last, desperate attempt to give him something beautiful, something he desired, without forcing him to confront the perceived shame of her support. It was a gamble, a silent prayer that perhaps, through this veiled act of love, some reconciliation might eventually blossom. Everything will remain absolutely confidential, precisely as we meticulously agreed upon, Mrs. Maeve, Chelsea assured her, her professional demeanor firmly re-established, her voice smooth as silk. Here is the detailed paperwork for the grand ballroom rental, the celebrity photographer, the elaborate floral decorations, and the acclaimed live band. Eleanor meticulously scrutinized each page, her keen accountant's eye missing no detail. It was, indeed, a staggering amount of money, well over $80,000, yet she knew, with a quiet certainty, that she could easily afford it. Daniel was her only child, her flesh and blood, and despite the emotional distance that had grown between them like an impenetrable wall, she yearned for his wedding day to be nothing less than spectacular, a memory he would cherish. She envisioned Serafina, radiant and beautiful, and Daniel, proud and happy, and a wistful ache settled in her chest. You do fully comprehend that if you choose to cancel with less than a week's notice before the event, we will unfortunately be unable to issue a full refund, correct? Chelsea inquired, her voice perfectly modulated, handing Eleanor a sleek, expensive pen. I completely understand, Eleanor replied, her voice steady, as she signed the last, crucial document. But rest assured, no one is going to cancel this wedding. That fateful day, Eleanor had absolutely no inkling of the profound, almost cruel, irony those seemingly innocuous words would later carry. The next 2 weeks, a blur of nervous anticipation and quiet preparations, flew by with an almost unsettling speed. In all that time, Daniel had never once called her, never once inquired if she would be attending the wedding. She hadn't received an official, embossed invitation either, a glaring omission that stung more deeply with each passing day. Yet, she clung to the fervent belief that it was merely an oversight, a logistical error in the vast machinery of a high-profile wedding. After all, what kind of son doesn't invite his own mother to his wedding? Surely, Daniel, despite their differences, wouldn't inflict such a public and personal slight. She packed the honeymoon gift, a substantial check, carefully placed within an elegant, pearl-white envelope, into her stylish handbag, a tangible symbol of her unwavering, albeit unacknowledged, support. The morning of the wedding day dawned bright and sunny, a deceptively cheerful canvas for the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. Eleanor rose early, performing her routine with practiced ease, taking a long, luxurious shower, allowing the warm water to soothe her nerves. She meticulously styled her still thick, though now entirely silver, hair, her fingers moving with a familiar precision. She carefully put on the exquisite sapphire blue gown she had purchased, feeling its luxurious fabric against her skin, and applied light, tasteful makeup, subtly highlighting her features. The Belvedere Grand Hotel, where the ceremony was to be held, stood as the epitome of luxury in downtown Charlotte, a towering edifice of polished marble and gleaming brass. Eleanor navigated her Ford Fusion into the crowded parking lot, a sea of gleaming, high-end vehicles that seemed to mock her modest car. For a fleeting moment, a wave of uncertainty washed over her. Perhaps she should have opted for a luxury town car or a chauffeured ride instead of arriving in her old, dependable car, drawing unwelcome attention to her lack of ostentation amidst such opulence. No, that was foolish, she firmly told herself, straightening her shoulders with a renewed sense of purpose. She had always been a practical woman, unburdened by superficiality, and she wasn't about to compromise her core principles for the sake of other people's fleeting opinions or social pretensions. The hotel lobby buzzed with activity, a cacophony of polite chatter and laughter. Guests in impeccably tailored suits and designer dresses stood in small, exclusive groups, their conversations a low hum of affluence. Eleanor scanned the crowd, trying desperately to locate familiar faces. Most of those present were strangers to her, clearly friends and relatives of Serafina's, a stark reminder of Daniel's carefully constructed new life. Over the years, Daniel had made virtually no effort to introduce her to his ever-expanding social circle, keeping her neatly compartmentalized, a relic of a past he preferred to distance himself from. Grandma. Suddenly, a joyful, familiar cry pierced through the polite murmur, and Eleanor spun around, her heart leaping. Ava, her 23-year-old granddaughter from Daniel's first marriage to Charlotte, was rushing towards her, her face alight with genuine warmth. Tall and slender, with Eleanor's striking blue eyes and rich, dark hair like her father's, Ava was the only one who had truly maintained a consistent, loving connection with Eleanor, a cherished lifeline to genuine affection. "You came!" Ava exclaimed, wrapping Eleanor in a tight, unreserved hug, a comforting embrace that momentarily eased the knot of anxiety in Eleanor's chest. "I'm so incredibly glad. I was so afraid you'd decide not to come because of..." Ava's voice trailed off, a unspoken acknowledgement of the delicate, often painful, dynamic between Eleanor and Daniel. But Eleanor knew precisely what she meant, because of her strained, distant relationship with Daniel. "How could I possibly miss my own son's wedding, darling?" Eleanor replied, a small, brittle smile touching her lips, a brave facade. "You look absolutely beautiful, Ava." Ava was resplendent in a soft, flowing periwinkle bridesmaid's gown, her natural grace shining through. She adjusted a stray curl and glanced around the opulent lobby. "Come on, I'll introduce you to some of the others," Ava offered eagerly, always striving to bridge gaps, to foster connection. But at that precise moment, Daniel, her son, approached them. He looked uncharacteristically tense, his jawline taut, his eyes shadowed despite the celebratory nature of the day. At 43, he remained an attractive man, tall, trim, with a meticulously groomed beard that already showed distinguished streaks of silver. His eyes, an exact replica of his late father's, usually held a distant politeness when he looked at Eleanor, but now they burned with an ill-concealed irritation, a flash of annoyance that was unmistakable. "Mom," he uttered, the single syllable infused with a profound sense of disbelief, as if her very presence were an unwelcome apparition, a ghost from a past he wished to bury. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor was instantly bewildered, her mind scrambling. This was not the greeting she had painstakingly imagined, not the fragile olive branch she had hoped for. "I came to your wedding, of course, Daniel," she replied, her voice thin, a mixture of hurt and confusion. Daniel's gaze darted nervously around the crowded lobby, his eyes wide with thinly veiled panic, as if Eleanor's presence threatened to unravel his meticulously crafted illusion of perfection. Then, with a practiced, almost forceful grip, he took her by the elbow and swiftly, yet subtly, steered her away from the other guests, guiding her towards a secluded, discreet alcove near a massive potted palm. "Listen," he began, his voice low, quiet, but imbued with an undeniable, steely firmness, audible only to her. "I thought we had thoroughly discussed this. You are not, in fact, on the official guest list." Eleanor stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words, unable to comprehend the blatant lie. They hadn't discussed anything of the sort. He had called her only twice in the past month, and both conversations had been excruciatingly brief and utterly formal, polite exchanges devoid of any real warmth or substance. "What precisely are you talking about, Daniel?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "How could I possibly not be invited to my own son's wedding?" He sighed dramatically, the exasperated air of a man forced to explain painfully obvious truths to a slow-witted child. "Mom, this is an incredibly elite event. Serafina's parents are here, they're highly influential. Our esteemed friends are present, our esteemed colleagues." He paused, his gaze deliberately avoiding hers, searching for the right, dismissive words. "I genuinely don't believe you would feel comfortable here." In that crushing moment, Eleanor's heart plummeted. She realized with chilling clarity that he hadn't merely failed to invite her, he had deliberately, meticulously, planned to exclude her. She, a woman who had dedicated her life to hard work, to building a successful business from the ground up with her own hands, was deemed utterly unsuitable for the rarefied, superficial society of his new family, a world he had so carefully, so desperately, constructed for himself. "You're ashamed of me," it wasn't a question, but a desolate, bitter statement, a truth that resonated with soul-crushing certainty. "No. Of course not, Mom." Daniel replied hastily, too quickly, his eyes betraying the lie with a fleeting flicker of guilt quickly masked by a fresh wave of irritation. It's just that Serafina is incredibly anxious, absolutely obsessed with ensuring that everything, absolutely everything, goes perfectly. Her parents have invested a substantial amount of money, and you don't want your laundromat mom to ruin her pristine, picture-perfect experience, Eleanor finished for him, her voice laced with a searing, acid irony that cut deep. Mom, please don't start, he hissed, sounding genuinely annoyed, his patience worn to a thin thread. I'm simply asking you to understand. We can meet after the honeymoon, perhaps in a smaller, more intimate setting. At that precise, exquisitely awkward moment, Serafina herself, a vision of carefully sculpted perfection, glided towards them. She looked utterly stunning in her 39 years, slender, with meticulously applied makeup and impeccably styled hair, wearing a haute couture gown from a world-renowned designer that likely cost more than Eleanor's entire annual wardrobe. Her face, a mask of polished politeness, expressed a feigned, polite surprise. Daniel, darling, is everything quite all right? She asked, her voice a saccharine purr, her gaze sweeping over Eleanor with an appraising, almost dismissive calculation, as if assessing an unexpected stain on her perfect canvas. Yes, everything's perfectly fine, Serafina, Daniel replied, his voice regaining an artificial smoothness, a practiced calm. Mom was just about to leave. Serafina's smile, a brittle, polite grimace that never quite reached her eyes, widened fractionally. Oh, Mrs. Maeve, what a genuine shame you couldn't stay for the ceremony. Perhaps some other time. Her words were delivered with a chilling finality, as if Eleanor's presence was a mere casual acquaintance, an unexpected interruption on a busy day, already relegated to the distant past. Eleanor looked at Daniel, her heart aching with a raw, visceral pain, expecting him, praying for him, to intervene, to speak a single word in her defense, to acknowledge her in some small, meaningful way. But he remained utterly silent, his gaze fixed somewhere over her shoulder, a profound betrayal in his avoidance. I'm truly sorry, but you weren't invited, he finally uttered quietly, his voice hollow, utterly devoid of warmth, a definitive, cold dismissal that echoed in the vast, indifferent lobby. Please, just go. Eleanor felt the hot sting of tears welling in her eyes, a familiar burning sensation, but she fiercely held them back, refusing to let them spill, not here, not now, not in front of them, not in front of the oblivious, chattering crowd. For years, she had deliberately turned a blind eye to his subtle neglects, constructed elaborate excuses for his emotional distance, pretended with a weary resignation that everything was perfectly acceptable. But today, something deep inside her, a fundamental thread of her being, snapped completely. The long-suffering patience she had cultivated for decades finally shattered. Whatever you say, Daniel, Eleanor nodded, her composure miraculously intact, her voice steady despite the raw tremor in her hands. Congratulations to both of you. She turned slowly to leave, each step an act of defiant will, but Ava, her loyal granddaughter, caught her arm, her young face etched with genuine distress, a pure reflection of sorrow. Grandma, please stay. Please. Tears stood openly in Ava's eyes, shimmering pools of heartbroken empathy. I want you to be here so much. Eleanor gently stroked Ava's cheek, her fingers lingering, a silent comfort. It's quite all right, honey. Call me tomorrow, won't you? She then headed purposefully for the grand exit, acutely aware of the lingering stares of the remaining guests, some openly curious, others discreetly whispering, their conversation a vague, judgmental hum. Eleanor wondered, with a bitter twist, what version of the truth they had been fed. Did they know that the groom's own mother had been so cruelly, so deliberately, excluded from her son's most important day? The humiliation was a suffocating weight, pressing down on her, robbing her of breath. Walking out of the opulent hotel, Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath of the crisp, late afternoon air, pulling it deep into her lungs. The sun was still shining brilliantly, a harsh, indifferent light, but she felt as if an impenetrable shadow had suddenly fallen across her world, enveloping her in a chilling darkness. She walked to her car on stiff, almost wooden legs, each step an act of pure, agonizing will, and finally slid behind the familiar steering wheel. For a few interminable minutes, she simply sat there, staring blankly ahead through the windshield, her mind a chaotic maelstrom, trying desperately to comprehend the raw, brutal reality of what had just transpired. The depth of the rejection was a physical ache. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she opened her elegant handbag and pulled out her phone. The time illuminated on the screen read 4:22 p.m. The ceremony was, by now, undoubtedly underway, having begun just 2 minutes prior. The grand banquet, a lavish affair for 120 esteemed guests, was meticulously scheduled to commence at 7 p.m., every single expense, every opulent detail, meticulously paid for in advance by her. She looked at the unopened, pearl-white envelope containing the generous honeymoon gift, still nestled innocently in her bag, a stark, painful symbol of her dashed hopes and unacknowledged generosity. Then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible click, she slowly started the car's engine. The familiar hum of the motor was a small comfort. She put the car in reverse, backing out of the sprawling, expensive parking lot of the Belvedere Grand Hotel, leaving behind the place where her son, Daniel, was celebrating the beginning of a new, meticulously curated life, a life, she now realized with soul-crushing certainty, in which she had no place, no role, no presence. The drive home seemed an endless, surreal journey, a blurred passage through a landscape of raw, throbbing pain. She drove on autopilot, her hands gripping the wheel, barely registering the familiar traffic lights and other drivers, her mind a relentless echo chamber of cruel phrases. "You weren't invited, Mom's just leaving, elite event." Each cutting word reverberated in her head, striking her like a fresh, stinging slap, deepening the wound in her soul. 68 years of life, a lifetime dedicated to selfless work, unwavering support, and boundless love, and this was her devastating culmination. Kicked out of her own son's wedding, dismissed as an unwanted, inconvenient guest. Her quiet, tree-lined street in Charlotte met her with its usual, almost mocking, calm. Old maple trees stood sentry along the road, their leaves beginning to turn, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Neat, unassuming middle-class houses, their facades untouched by time, stood as silent witnesses. Nothing, absolutely nothing, had visibly changed here in decades, a stark, almost cruel, contrast to the seismic, irreversible shift that had just occurred within her own world. She parked her Fusion outside her quaint, one-story house with its charming white picket fence, a picture of suburban tranquility, and for a few interminable minutes, she simply sat in the car, unable to bring herself to move, to exit, to face the brutal reality awaiting her inside. It was as if by remaining cocooned within the familiar confines of her vehicle, she could somehow postpone, for just a little while longer, the moment when she would have to fully acknowledge the devastating, undeniable truth of what had transpired. Finally, with a weary sigh, she forced herself to emerge from the car and headed towards the porch, her legs heavy, her movements slow and deliberate, each step weighted with sorrow. The keys trembled noticeably in her hand as she inserted them into the lock, the metallic click echoing loudly in the oppressive, hollow silence. Crossing the threshold, Eleanor mechanically kicked off her sensible shoes, leaving them abandoned by the door, and walked slowly into the living room. The house, her sanctuary, where the vast majority of her life had been meticulously spent, now felt profoundly foreign, hollowed out and empty, its familiar objects mocking her with their indifferent stillness. She gazed at the array of framed photographs adorning the mantelpiece, a silent, chronological gallery of her son's life. Daniel as a small child, a perpetually smiling boy with a mischievous glint in his eyes and a charmingly knocked-out front tooth. Daniel the confident teenager, clutching a worn soccer ball, brimming with boundless youthful energy. Daniel the proud college graduate, radiating ambition, poised for a future she had always hoped to share. In all the pictures, a younger, more innocent Daniel was smiling directly at her, his eyes reflecting a warmth and affection that now felt utterly alien. When did things change so irrevocably? At what agonizing point, she wondered with a bitter ache, did she transition from his beloved mother to a mere burden, a shameful secret to be carefully concealed from his elite new world? Her gaze settled on a particular photograph, her late husband, Robert, and herself, standing proudly with little Daniel, then just 8 years old, on a sun-drenched beach, the vast ocean stretching endlessly behind them. Robert was 38 at the time, she was 33. They looked so undeniably happy, so utterly ordinary, a simple, middle-class family enjoying a fleeting moment of vacation bliss, their future unwritten, seemingly bright. "What would you say now, Robert?" she whispered, her voice a fragile wisp, tracing the contours of her husband's beloved face in the faded photograph, his image forever frozen in time. "What would you possibly say to your son?" But Robert hadn't been around to offer guidance or comfort for 17 long years. A sudden, cruel heart attack had tragically taken him when Daniel was a mere 26 years old, still her loving son, still visiting every weekend, still seemingly unashamed of his modest origins. She gently placed the photograph back in its hallowed spot and sank heavily into the familiar depths of her favorite armchair, its once comforting cushions now offering little solace against the raw, emotional pain. Robert and she had embarked on their small business venture together, a cozy laundromat nestled on the bustling corner of Maple and 4th Streets. He, with his pragmatic mind, handled the equipment maintenance and the business negotiations. She, with her meticulous eye for detail, managed the operational processes, the meticulous organization, and the complex bookkeeping. When he was gone, the crushing weight of responsibility for both aspects fell entirely upon her shoulders, a dizzying, overwhelming burden. But, with a quiet strength that surprised even herself, she not only managed but thrived. What's more, over the ensuing 10 years, she had meticulously expanded their humble venture into a flourishing chain of 7 successful laundromats strategically located throughout Wilmington, a testament to her sheer resilience and unwavering business acumen. In the hidden depths of her kitchen table drawer, she still kept the neatly filed copies of the checks she had quietly, generously, written to Daniel over the years, the substantial down payment on his first apartment when he decided to venture out on his own, a significant contribution to his first wedding to Catherine, Ava's mother, the exorbitant lawyer's fees incurred during their contentious divorce, the hefty tuition for Ava's exclusive private school, ensuring her granddaughter received the best possible education, and discreet payments to clear his mounting credit card debts when he found himself in temporary financial distress. She was always there for him, always, offering both unwavering emotional support and substantial financial aid, a constant, reliable presence in his life. But with each passing year, Daniel had incrementally grown more and more distant, subtly pulling away. His carefully cultivated new circle of influential friends, his rapidly accelerating career at the formidable regional insurance company, his insatiable desire for recognition within high society, all of these external ambitions gradually, almost imperceptibly, created an ever-widening chasm between them, a silent, growing gulf of unspoken expectations and unacknowledged sacrifices. When Eleanor made the momentous decision to sell her thriving business 5 years ago, Daniel, sensing the significant financial windfall, suddenly took an unprecedented, almost frantic, interest in her life. He began to visit with surprising regularity, called more frequently, and inquired with feigned concern about her health. Eleanor, far from naive, keenly realized that his primary concern revolved entirely around the substantial proceeds from the sale. Yet, despite this harsh truth, she desperately wanted to believe that somewhere, buried deep beneath this superficial interest, there was still a genuine flicker of familial concern, a residual warmth of affection. The amount she received from the sale was, indeed, impressively substantial, a staggering $2,300,000, far more money than she had ever personally handled. She thoughtfully purchased herself a new car, the same reliable Ford Fusion she had driven to the wedding today, invested wisely in remodeling her beloved home, transforming it into a comfortable sanctuary, and, on the sagacious advice of a trusted financial advisor, carefully placed the remaining significant sum into secure, long-term investments. Daniel, upon learning the precise figure of her newfound wealth, wasted no time in presenting her with what he grandiosely termed a brilliant business plan. He passionately urged her to invest a considerable sum in some dubious startup venture pitched by one of his unproven college friends. Eleanor, exercising caution and her inherent business sense, firmly refused. It was far too risky, too speculative, too poorly defined. He, in turn, took immediate offense, his face clouding with irritation, accusing her of being old-fashioned, utterly incapable of grasping the future. Eleanor, with a quiet, biting retort, gently reminded him that it was precisely her old-fashionedness, her unwavering dedication and meticulous management, that had painstakingly built the highly successful business from which she had just reaped such a substantial profit. They had a heated argument, a rare, direct confrontation that left a bitter taste. After that unpleasant exchange, his visits became markedly less frequent, his calls frustratingly shorter, the unspoken tension between them a constant, palpable presence. When he finally announced his engagement to Serafina 8 months ago, Eleanor, despite the lingering chill, was momentarily overjoyed, a resurgence of her inherent optimism. She foolishly thought, in a burst of renewed hope, that perhaps this significant new phase in his life would finally help them mend their fractured relationship, offering a much-needed fresh start. Naive old woman, she chastised herself now, the bitter realization a sharp, self-inflicted wound. The shrill ringing of the phone in her purse abruptly pierced the melancholic quiet, startling Eleanor out of her painful memories. The bank's number, a familiar digital signature, popped up on the screen. It was the scheduled weekly call from her personal manager, Richard Sterling, a routine procedure for his high-value clients with substantial deposits. "Mrs. Maeve, good afternoon," she heard Richard's characteristically cheerful voice, oblivious to the profound emotional turmoil that had just engulfed her. "I'm calling to ensure everything is in order with your accounts and investments." Eleanor remained utterly silent, her gaze fixed intently on the antique clock ticking placidly on the living room wall. 5:15 p.m. The ceremony had already begun, she calculated with a cold precision. Daniel and Serafina were, at this very moment, undoubtedly exchanging their vows, their voices echoing in the grand ballroom. And in a mere hour and a half, the lavish banquet would commence, a meticulously planned, extravagant dinner for 120 privileged guests, complete with exorbitantly expensive wines, a renowned live band, and dancing scheduled to continue until the early hours of the morning. All of it, every single opulent detail, fully paid for by her. "Mrs. Maeve? Are you still on the line?" Richard inquired, his voice now tinged with a subtle, professional concern. "Yes, I'm sorry," Eleanor coughed, clearing her throat, her voice regaining a steely resolve. "I have a rather urgent question, Richard. If I were to cancel the payments that are due in the next few hours, is that, technically, still possible?" "Technically, yes, Mrs. Maeve, if they haven't been finalized yet in the system," Richard replied, a hint of confusion creeping into his usually unflappable tone. "What specific payments are we discussing?" Eleanor swiftly opened her email on her phone, navigating to the detailed invoice from the wedding agency. She found the email, detailing a series of expenses, several large transactions totaling approximately $80,000. "The Belvedere Grand Hotel," she began, her voice gaining strength with each word, "Golden Leaf Catering Company, Jameson's Photography Studio, Rosemary Flower Salon." She recited the list, each name a deliberate, calculated step, feeling a potent wave of determination surging through her, hardening her resolve like tempered steel. Richard remained silent on the other end, clearly taken aback, his surprise palpable even through the phone line. "These are quite substantial sums, Mrs. Maeve," he finally said, his voice careful. "May I perhaps inquire as to the reason for this sudden change?" "It is for the payment of my son's wedding services," Eleanor stated, her voice flat, devoid of any discernible emotion. "However, there have been, unforeseen circumstances." She paused, allowing the unspoken implication to hang heavily in the air, a silent accusation. "I wish to cancel all of these payments immediately." "I understand, Mrs. Maeve," Richard responded cautiously, his professional training evident. "But I must respectfully caution you that there may be significant penalties for canceling, and I am entirely prepared for any and all penalties," Eleanor interrupted him, her voice firm, leaving absolutely no room for further discussion or argument. "Please, Richard, do whatever you need to do, immediately." There was a brief, tense pause. Eleanor could distinctly hear the rapid, almost frantic, clicking of Richard's keyboard on the other end. "Okay, Mrs. Maeve," he finally said, his voice now imbued with a newfound sense of urgency. "I see the payments in the system. Most of them are actually scheduled for processing tomorrow morning, so we have sufficient time to stop them. However, some smaller ones may have already been partially authorized. I will contact the back office and our payment processing department right away to fully halt everything." "Thank you, Richard," Eleanor replied, her voice softening slightly, a hint of relief. "One more thing, if you don't mind. I've been considering this. If I cancel these payments, the money will, of course, remain in my account. But what, precisely, would I do with it?" It was, after all, intended for Daniel, for his happy new start in life, a life, I now fully realize, in which I truly have no place. Her voice was tinged with a quiet, profound sadness. I would like to establish a trust account, a substantial one, in the name of my granddaughter, Ava Maeve. I would like to transfer these specific funds there, to ensure her future. Of course, Mrs. Maeve, that can certainly be arranged with ease. Richard's voice was now back to its reassuring, accommodating tone, clearly relieved to be dealing with something more routine. We will require some additional paperwork, naturally, but we can initiate the entire process as early as this afternoon. They meticulously discussed the legal and financial details, and Richard, ever professional, promised to call back as soon as all the payments had been definitively halted. As they concluded the conversation, Eleanor felt a strange, almost exhilarating sense of relief, a profound lightness that settled in her chest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she had acted decisively, on her own terms, refusing to be swayed by Daniel's expectations, refusing to blindly tolerate his dismissive attitude towards her. It was a reclaiming of her own agency, a silent declaration of independence. The very next call Eleanor made was to Everbloom Events. Chelsea answered after the third ring, her voice still brimming with manufactured cheerfulness. Everbloom Events, how may I assist you? Hi, Chelsea, this is Eleanor Maeve. Oh, Mrs. Maeve. Chelsea's voice instantly conveyed a startled surprise, a note of confused recognition. The wedding ceremony has already commenced. Everything is proceeding precisely according to plan. Was there something specific you wished to clarify? I am calling to inform you that I am canceling all wedding-related payments, Eleanor stated, her voice calm, utterly devoid of inflection, a flat, undeniable statement of fact. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, then Chelsea let out an uncertain, almost hysterical laugh, as if she had just heard a particularly tasteless, nonsensical joke. I'm so terribly sorry, Mrs. Maeve, what did you say? You're simply kidding, right? This can't be real. No, Chelsea, I am not kidding, Eleanor replied, her voice firm, a steel rod of resolve. I have just contacted my bank. All scheduled transactions will be definitively stopped. But that's utterly impossible. Chelsea's voice shook, her professional facade crumbling rapidly into outright panic. The ceremony is already well underway. The esteemed guests have fully gathered. The lavish banquet is scheduled to begin in little more than an hour. You can't simply, Eleanor interrupted her, her voice cutting through the panic like a sharp blade, and I am doing it. There is a force majeure clause clearly stipulated in our contract, is there not? They're coming, Mrs. Maeve. Oh, please, let's calm down and talk about this. What exactly happened? Perhaps we can somehow find a mutually agreeable solution. Chelsea's voice was now a desperate plea, bordering on frantic. There is a solution, Chelsea, Eleanor reiterated, her voice unwavering. The payments have been definitively cancelled. But the vendors. The hotel site. It's going to be a colossal scandal. There was sheer, unadulterated panic in Chelsea's voice, a rising tide of despair. Not my problem, Eleanor replied, her voice flat, emotionless. She could almost physically sense Chelsea on the other end of the line, desperately struggling to collect her scattered thoughts, trying to regain some semblance of control amidst the unraveling chaos. Okay, I absolutely have to inform the bride and groom immediately. Go right ahead, Chelsea, Eleanor replied, her voice steady, an unnerving calm. Tell them that their generous sponsor suddenly withdrew their vital funding. But they genuinely believe that Serafina's parents paid for everything. Chelsea exclaimed, her voice incredulous, laced with horrified disbelief. How on earth do I explain such a thing? That, Chelsea, is no longer my concern, Eleanor paused, allowing the weighty silence to punctuate her next words, delivering them with a quiet, devastating impact. You can, however, tell them the unvarnished truth, that the groom's own mother, the very woman who was so deliberately and cruelly not invited to her son's own wedding, was, in fact, secretly paying for their entire extravagant party. Oh my God, Chelsea mumbled, a horrified gasp escaping her lips, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so incredibly sorry, Mrs. Maeve. I honestly had no idea. Now you do. Good day, Chelsea." Eleanor calmly ended the call and deliberately placed the phone down on the table, the small click a punctuation mark to her decision. Her hands were trembling, but not from excitement or fear. It was a strange, almost forgotten, sense of profound liberation, a heady rush of unburdened freedom she hadn't experienced in years. She had allowed Daniel to manipulate her, to exploit her unwavering love and financial generosity for so many years, taking advantage without offering anything resembling genuine gratitude or affection in return. She had waited, with a quiet, enduring patience, for gratitude, for respect, for simple human warmth, for a flicker of genuine appreciation. And she had received nothing but cold indifference and calculated exploitation. Suddenly, the phone rang again, its insistent buzz startling her. Ava's name, accompanied by a small, smiling emoji, popped up on the screen. Eleanor took a deep, fortifying breath and answered. "Grandma?" Ava's voice, usually bright and cheerful, now sounded strained, laced with urgent worry and a frantic energy. "Where are you? Why did you leave so abruptly?" Eleanor closed her eyes, a profound sense of protective love washing over her. Ava was, truly, the only person she genuinely cared about in this entire convoluted situation, the single, pure, untainted connection in her otherwise fractured life. "Your father asked me to leave, dear," Eleanor said, her voice gentle, infused with a weary sadness. "He said I wasn't invited, that my presence was an inconvenience." "What?" Ava exclaimed, her disbelief palpable, bordering on outright indignation. "That absolutely can't be. He couldn't possibly have said that to you." "Yes, Ava," Eleanor replied softly, the bitter truth undeniable, "he did. Those were his exact words." On the other end of the line, Eleanor could hear a muffled murmur of voices, a growing din in the background. The ceremony had apparently just concluded, and the guests were beginning their celebratory procession into the opulent banquet hall, their excited chatter swelling into a loud hum. "That's utterly terrible, Grandma. I'm going to talk to him right now. I'll make him apologize. He had no right to treat you like that." "Don't, sweetheart," Eleanor interrupted her gently, her voice firm yet tender. "Don't you dare spoil your own enjoyment of this occasion. Have fun, dance, immerse yourself in the moment." "What fun, Grandma?" There were undeniable tears in Ava's voice now, raw and vulnerable, the sound heartbreaking. "How can I possibly enjoy myself when I know you've been treated so abominably? It's simply not fair." "There are many things in life that are not fair, my dear," Eleanor replied, her voice imbued with the hard-won wisdom of years. "This is not the first time I have faced such unkindness, and it certainly won't be the last." "Grandmother," Ava suddenly spoke, her voice dropping, almost a hesitant whisper, a shift in her tone from distress to growing confusion. "Something very strange is happening here. The hotel manager is now embroiled in a heated argument with Papa and Serafina about something. They seem incredibly upset, quite frantic, actually." Eleanor remained silent on her end, a quiet observer. So, Richard had already taken decisive action, and the payments were irrevocably blocked. Or perhaps Chelsea, the frantic wedding planner, had already delivered the devastating news to the various organizers. Either way, the tangible repercussions of Eleanor's carefully calculated decision had already begun to manifest, a silent, powerful ripple effect spreading through the facade of Daniel's meticulously planned, perfect day. "Grandma? Are you still there?" Ava asked worriedly, sensing her grandmother's prolonged silence. "Yes, sweetie, I'm right here. Listen closely, whatever unravels tonight, remember this, I love you unconditionally, and absolutely nothing is going to alter that profound feeling." "You're scaring me, Grandma," Ava laughed nervously, a strained, thin sound, bordering on hysteria. "You sound like you're saying a final goodbye." "No, of course not, darling," Eleanor reassured her, a faint, bittersweet smile touching her lips. "I simply want you to always know that you can consistently count on me, always." "I know, Grandma. I love you too, so much. Eleanor could hear other voices in the background, muffled but insistent, calling urgently for Ava. I have to go, Grandma, Ava said quickly, her voice a mix of apology and mounting urgency. I think some serious problems with the banquet are starting. I'll call you back later, okay? Of course, darling. Go. Eleanor gently hung up the phone and leaned back into the comfortable armchair, a deep, satisfied sigh escaping her lips. It's done. There's no turning back from this decisive action. Whatever chaotic events unfolded next, Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty, that she had done the right thing. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she had ceased to be an invisible ATM for her manipulative son and had, instead, chosen to reclaim her own dignity, to start respecting herself anew. The phone rang again, its insistent buzz jarring the quiet. This time, Daniel's name, illuminated on the screen, glared at her. Eleanor stared at the display, watching the phone vibrate relentlessly on the small side table, one ring, a second, a third, then a sudden, abrupt silence. After a tense minute, a frantic message popped up, Mom, we need to talk. Urgently. Call me back. Now. Eleanor deliberately placed the phone screen down on the table, its desperate vibrations now muffled. She had absolutely no desire to speak to her son, at least not today. Let him fully realize the magnitude of what he had done first. Let him feel, truly feel, at least a fraction of the raw, agonizing pain he had so carelessly inflicted upon her. She rose from the armchair and walked slowly to the large living room window. The sun, a fiery orb, was beginning its majestic descent, painting the Charlotte sky in breathtaking hues of vibrant orange and soft pink, a masterpiece of natural beauty. Strangely, for the first time in years, Eleanor felt truly, undeniably alive. It was as if she had finally shed a crushing, suffocating weight she had been carrying around for decades, a heavy burden of unacknowledged sacrifice and unfulfilled expectations, finally lifted from her weary shoulders. The phone rang again, and again, and again, its relentless summons echoing in the suddenly lighter house. Sophia nervously rubbed the delicate silver bracelet on her wrist, her eyes wide with a mixture of horrified fascination and utter disbelief as she witnessed the unfolding chaos. What had begun as her father's meticulously planned, perfect, wedding was rapidly spiraling into an unmitigated disaster before her very eyes, a grand illusion shattering into a million shimmering pieces. The banquet hall of the Belvedere Grand Hotel was, undeniably, magnificent, snow-white tablecloths draped elegantly over every table, crystal chandeliers shimmering overhead, casting a soft, opulent glow, and exquisite floral arrangements, bursting with vibrant blooms, adorned every surface. Yet, the celebratory party atmosphere had completely evaporated, giving way to an oppressive cloud of tension and bewildered confusion that hung thick in the air. In a far corner of the expansive room, her father, Daniel Vance, was engaged in a vehement, almost furious, argument with the hotel manager, a short, portly man in a pristine, austere suit whose face was already flushed crimson with barely suppressed frustration. Serafina, his newlywed wife, stood rigidly nearby, her perfect, unblemished makeup utterly failing to conceal the expression of raw, unadulterated panic contorting her features. There must be some egregious misunderstanding, Sophia heard her father insist, his voice strained, bordering on a desperate plea for normalcy. The payments were unequivocally confirmed a full week ago. The hotel manager shook his head slowly, his lips pressed into a thin, unyielding line. Mr. Vance, I have just received an urgent notice from our finance department. The payment has been definitively withdrawn. We simply cannot, under any circumstances, provide services without prior payment. But that's utterly absurd. Serafina shrieked, her voice shrill with disbelief. My parents, Sophia frowned, a new piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Serafina's parents hadn't fully paid? Her father had always vehemently insisted on taking care of all the expenses himself, often bragging, with thinly veiled arrogance, about his boundless financial independence and his impressive success in the cutthroat insurance business. His carefully cultivated image of the self-made man. Her brief musings were abruptly interrupted by Serafina's piercing, loud voice, a desperate, almost hysterical cry. Check again. There's some kind of colossal mistake. The guests have already fully gathered, we simply cannot cancel this banquet now. Sophia looked around the rapidly emptying hall. Indeed, approximately 120 guests had originally gathered, but many were already sitting at tables, looking at each other in bewildered silence, their initial excitement replaced by an uncomfortable, growing curiosity. Others stood in small, nervous groups, talking quietly amongst themselves, casting surreptitious, curious glances in the direction of the increasingly heated argument. Seraphina's parents, Arthur and Patricia Harrison, an impeccably elegant couple in their late 60s, separated themselves from their bewildered group and, with expressions of growing alarm, walked swiftly towards their distraught daughter. What on earth is transpiring here? Arthur Harrison, a tall, distinguished gray-haired man with a naturally commanding, intimidating presence, demanded, his voice laced with impatient authority. Why isn't the champagne being served? Seraphina whirled to face him, her face contorted with an expression of utter despair, her perfect composure having completely disintegrated. Dad, there's been some kind of dreadful misunderstanding about the payment. They're saying the payments have been withdrawn. Withdrawn? Arthur Harrison frowned deeply, his brow furrowing in profound disbelief. What payments are you referring to? Sophia watched, transfixed, as Daniel and Seraphina exchanged quick, desperate glances, a silent, frantic communication passing between them. At that very moment, a woman, crisp and efficient, entered the hall with a clipboard firmly in hand, her name tag clearly identifying her as Ms. Reed, the unflappable representative from Everbloom Events. Mr. and Mrs. Vance, she addressed the bewildered newlyweds, her voice calm but imbued with an undeniable, steely authority. I urgently need to speak with you both. They stepped aside, forming a small, tense, and utterly isolated circle. Sophia, acting on a sudden, powerful impulse, stealthily moved closer, trying to blend into the lingering shadows, desperate to overhear the conversation. All payments have been definitively withdrawn by the main sponsor, Ms. Reed was calmly stating, her professional tone unwavering. We have repeatedly attempted to contact the bank, but their decision is final and irrevocable. The main sponsor? Daniel interjected, his voice rising sharply in disbelief, laced with a tremor of fear. What precisely are you talking about? Who, pray tell, is this main sponsor? Ms. Reed looked genuinely confused, surprised by his apparent ignorance. Your mother, Mr. Vance. Eleanor Maeve. She meticulously paid for the vast majority of the wedding expenses, covering all the major contracts. Sophia barely held back a gasp of stunned surprise. Grandma? Grandmother was the one who had, in secret, financed all this breathtaking luxury, this entire opulent facade? Daniel's face, already pale with shock, instantly flushed crimson with raw, unadulterated anger, a wave of incandescent fury washing over him. What kind of utterly ridiculous nonsense is this? My mother paid for nothing. It was all Seraphina's parents, every single cent. Arthur Harrison, hearing his name, moved even closer, his face hardening into a mask of grim suspicion. What on earth are you talking about, Daniel? Patricia and I only covered the costs of the pre-wedding dinner rehearsal. You explicitly told us you were taking care of all the main expenses, the entire grand affair. Seraphina was now ashen-faced, her complexion utterly devoid of color. She looked at her husband with wide, bewildered eyes, the careful makeup on her face streaked with fresh, desperate tears. Daniel, what on earth are they talking about? Sophia saw her father swallow hard, his Adam's apple bobbing frantically. He furiously pulled out his sleek cell phone and began dialing a number, his fingers moving with jerky, desperate haste, stepping away from the rapidly disintegrating group. Sophia was absolutely certain he was calling her grandmother. She seized the opportune moment of general confusion and swiftly slipped through the grand glass doors, out onto the hotel terrace, needing, desperately, to call her grandmother immediately, to understand the full extent of this unprecedented catastrophe. Taking out her cell phone, her fingers trembling slightly, Sophia dialed a familiar number. Grandma, she asked, her voice a frantic, breathless whisper, when Eleanor answered. We are having an absolute nightmare here. What in the world is happening? There was a brief, tense silence on the other end of the line. Then Eleanor sighed softly, a weary, almost contented sound. I suppose they've finally found out, my dear. I cancelled the payments, as I told you I would. So it's true. Sophia lowered her voice even further, even though there was no one else on the spacious terrace, just the gentle, warm evening breeze rustling through the potted plants. You paid for Papa's entire wedding? But, why in such profound secrecy? Your father would simply never accept direct financial help from me, my dear. You know all too well how incredibly complicated our relationship has become, Eleanor explained, her voice tinged with a familiar, deep-seated sadness. He desperately wanted to throw a lavish, impressive wedding for Serafina, something grand and ostentatious, but the plain truth is, he genuinely couldn't afford it on his own. Sophia leaned heavily against the cool railing of the terrace, the evening air warm and fragrant with the sweet, intoxicating scent of night-blooming jasmine from the hotel gardens. Somewhere in the far distance, the sun was sinking below the Charlotte skyline, painting the vast sky in breathtaking, fiery hues of pink and molten gold, such an undeniably beautiful, serene evening for such a truly terrible, public unraveling. But why, Grandma, why did you actually cancel the payments? She asked, though deep down, a chilling certainty had already settled within her, whispering the answer. Because your father, my dear, quite literally kicked me out of my own son's wedding, Eleanor replied simply, her voice flat, utterly devoid of dramatic inflection, the raw, unvarnished facts laid bare with a devastating clarity. He explicitly stated I wasn't invited, that I simply didn't fit in to their elite event. Sophia closed her eyes, a wave of profound shame and bitter disappointment washing over her. She loved her father deeply, despite his many flaws, but sometimes his ingrained snobbery, his insatiable desire to appear perpetually better than he truly was, his relentless pursuit of superficial status, crossed all imaginable boundaries, becoming truly repulsive. That's absolutely terrible, grandmother. Please, forgive him. It's not about forgiveness, Ava, Eleanor countered, her voice firm, resolute. It's about fundamental respect. I have unfailingly supported your father for years, given him significant sums of money when he desperately needed it, and all I ever humbly asked for in return was a little genuine attention and a modicum of simple gratitude. But for him, I was consistently deemed never good enough. Not educated enough, not refined enough, not socially acceptable enough. Sophia heard a rising cacophony of noise from behind her and instinctively turned around. Through the grand glass doors, she could clearly see utter chaos rapidly unfolding within the magnificent banquet hall. Hotel employees in crisp uniforms and bewildered representatives from the flower company were frantically taking down the elaborate floral arrangements from the tables and hastily packing them into large cardboard boxes. Waiters, their faces grim, were efficiently removing crystal glasses and gleaming cutlery, their movements quick and practiced, as if dismantling a stage set after a performance. The remaining guests looked at each other with perplexed expressions, their confusion swiftly giving way to growing unease, then outright discomfort. Some of them were already starting to gather their belongings, grabbing coats from the cloakroom, making hasty exits. Grandmother, the place is completely falling apart. Sophia exclaimed, returning to the phone conversation, her voice a horrified, breathless whisper. The flowers are being taken away, the catering is packing up the food. It's an absolute nightmare. I am genuinely sorry you have to witness this, dear. Eleanor's voice sounded truly regretful, devoid of any hint of triumph or satisfaction. You absolutely do not deserve to be dragged into this distressing situation. This is not about you. Sophia shook her head vehemently, though her grandmother, miles away, could not see her gesture. It's so incredibly humiliating for Papa and Serafina. All the guests are seeing their perfect wedding utterly disintegrate before their very eyes. Sometimes, Ava, lessons are hard, Eleanor said quietly, her voice tinged with a profound, almost weary, wisdom, but they are often profoundly necessary. Again, a sharp, authoritative noise from the hall caught Sophia's attention. Through the glass doors, she saw her father, his face inflamed with incandescent anger, arguing furiously, his voice rising, with the catering manager. Serafina, standing rigidly beside him, looked utterly distraught, on the verge of breaking down into uncontrollable sobs, her carefully styled hair beginning to wilt, her meticulously applied makeup smudged from stray, desperate tears. "Daddy's absolutely furious," Sophia reported, her voice hushed, her eyes wide. "He's yelling at everyone, and Serafina looks like she's going to burst into tears at any second. Your father has always struggled terribly with dealing with difficulties," Ava, Eleanor sighed, a familiar, resigned sound. "When things don't proceed precisely according to his meticulously laid plans, he inevitably loses his temper." At that moment, Sophia noticed Daniel pulling out his phone again, his fingers jabbing furiously at the screen. A mere second later, Eleanor's phone vibrated with an incoming call. "It's Daddy calling you, Grandma," Sophia said, a fresh wave of dread washing over her. "I can clearly see that, dear," Eleanor answered, her tone remarkably calm, utterly unruffled. "It's the 5th time he's called in the last half an hour. I will not answer it. He won't calm down until he talks to you, Grandma. Let him fully cool down first, Ava. It won't achieve anything productive to speak with him in this state." Sophia reluctantly went back into the hall, observing the situation rapidly deteriorating. The hotel manager was now, with a firm, uncompromising voice, demanding that the remaining guests vacate the room if the substantial bill wasn't settled within the next 30 minutes. Serafina's parents, Arthur and Patricia Harrison, looked utterly shocked and profoundly embarrassed, their carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Arthur Harrison was hotly arguing something with Daniel, poking his finger aggressively into his chest, his voice laced with venomous accusation. "Grandma, Serafina's parents are now fighting with Daddy," Sophia said into the phone, her voice barely audible over the rising din of argument and departure. "Apparently, he told them he was paying for everything himself, and they didn't even know you were secretly co-financing all of this. Your father, Ava, never missed a single opportunity to appear far more successful and affluent than he genuinely was." Eleanor's voice was tinged with a deep, pervasive bitterness, a rare glimpse into her long-held pain. "He always wanted desperately to impress precisely the right people, to maintain his carefully constructed facade." Sophia moved even closer to the arguing group, attempting to remain as inconspicuous as possible, a silent, almost invisible, witness to her family's dramatic collapse. "You explicitly swore you'd meticulously take care of all the expenses, Daniel." Arthur Harrison raged, his face contorted with fury, his voice booming. "You boasted that your business was absolutely booming. And now it turns out that all this time, your very own mother was secretly paying for your wedding, a mother, I might add, whom you didn't even bother to invite." "That's utterly untrue." Daniel desperately defended himself, his voice high-pitched and frantic, bordering on a whine. "I had absolutely no idea she had interfered. This is some kind of colossal misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Arthur Harrison snorted contemptuously, his lip curling in undisguised disgust. "The only misunderstanding here, Daniel, is that my daughter, my precious Serafina, married a man like you." Serafina, who was standing rigidly nearby, finally broke down completely, bursting into gut-wrenching sobs. "Papa, please don't," she wailed, her voice muffled by her trembling hands. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." But it was far too late. The remaining guests did not even attempt to hide their avid interest in the unfolding, very public, drama. Someone even openly filmed what was happening on their cell phone. Sophia imagined with horror that the humiliating videos would undoubtedly spread like wildfire across social networks, turning their private misery into a public spectacle. "Grandma, it's absolutely terrible," she whispered frantically into the phone. "Everything's truly falling apart. Mr. Harrison just called Daddy a liar in front of all the guests." "I'm sorry about that, Ava," Eleanor replied, and Sophia could clearly hear the genuine regret in her voice, a quiet, profound sadness, devoid of any sense of triumph. "But your father made his unfortunate choice when he decided that his mother, the one who loved him unconditionally, wasn't good enough for his new, elite life." At that precise moment, the hotel manager clapped his hands sharply, the sound cutting through the chaotic din, immediately drawing everyone's attention, his face grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loudly, his voice resonating with authority, Due to unforeseen circumstances, this event is definitively cancelled. Please, I must respectfully ask you to vacate the room within the next 15 minutes. A collective murmur of voices, a mix of shock, confusion, and hurried chatter, rippled through the rapidly emptying room. Guests began to gather their belongings, many approaching the bewildered newlyweds, offering awkward apologies and forced sympathies. Sophia watched as Serafina, her face buried in her hands, ran out of the hall, accompanied by her equally distraught mother. Daniel stood motionless in the midst of all this swirling chaos, utterly confused, profoundly humiliated, his meticulously constructed world crumbling around him in a spectacular fashion. They've officially cancelled the banquet, Grandma, Sophia informed her grandmother, her voice flat with disbelief, relaying the final, devastating blow. They're asking everyone to leave now. I understand, dear, Eleanor replied quietly, her voice tinged with a deep, weary wisdom. You go too, Ava. You shouldn't remain there. What about Daddy? Sophia asked, a desperate, childlike plea in her voice. I can't just abandon him in this situation. You are a good daughter, Ava. Eleanor's voice was soft, gentle, almost maternal, far more kind than he perhaps deserves. But sometimes, people must confront the direct consequences of their actions entirely on their own. Sophia hesitated, torn by a powerful conflict of emotions. On the one hand, she deeply understood her grandmother's profound hurt. The way Daniel had treated her today was, inarguably, unforgivable. On the other hand, he was, despite everything, her father, her blood, and seeing him so utterly broken, so publicly humiliated, was genuinely painful. At that very moment, Daniel noticed her, his eyes blazing with a fresh wave of fury, and headed directly in her direction. His face was contorted with incandescent anger, a grotesque mask of rage. Are you talking to her? He almost shrieked, pointing accusatorily at the phone clutched in her hand. Let me talk to her. Give me that phone, now. Sophia instinctively took a frantic step back, clutching the phone protectively. Dad, now is truly not the time for this. Give me the phone, he roared, almost shouting, lunging forward and holding out his hand, his patience utterly gone. Grandma, Daddy desperately wants to talk to you. Sophia said quickly into the receiver, her voice trembling. He is very, very angry. I hear you, dear, Eleanor replied, her voice remaining remarkably calm, a stark contrast to the escalating chaos. Do not give him the phone if you are unwilling. But if he insists, I am prepared to speak with him. Daniel, with a sudden, furious lunge, snatched the phone out of his daughter's hands before she could even make up her mind, his grip fierce, almost painful. Mom, he bellowed into the receiver, his voice trembling with an uncontrollable fury. What in God's name have you done? Do you even comprehend that you've utterly ruined my wedding? Sophia couldn't discern what her grandmother was replying, but she watched, horrified, as her father's face contorted, shifting rapidly from incandescent fury to profound shock, then back again to a renewed, more intense anger. How could you? His voice shook, laced with raw disbelief and a deep sense of betrayal. How could you possibly humiliate me like that in front of everyone? In front of Serafina's parents? In front of all our esteemed friends? A tense pause, filled only with his ragged breathing. Then, his tone shifted, a new, desperate, almost pleading note entering his voice. This is completely, utterly different. Yes, I admittedly left you off the guest list, but that is absolutely no justifiable reason to sabotage me like this. You did this purely out of revenge, admit it. Another pause, longer, more agonizing than the previous one. Daniel's face grew progressively paler, a dawning, terrifying realization of the full financial implications settling upon him. No, you genuinely don't understand, Mom. I can't just pay you back now. I simply don't have that kind of money in liquid cash, and the bank isn't open tonight for such a transfer. Sophia saw her father listening intently, his shoulders gradually slumping, as if all the air had suddenly been let out of him, the grand facade deflating into a pathetic shell. Please, Mom, there was a raw, desperate plea in his voice now, utterly devoid of his usual arrogance. Give the payments back. We can meticulously discuss our differences later. Right now, my reputation, my carefully constructed marriage, absolutely everything is at stake." He listened for a while longer, his face contorted with a fresh wave of impotent rage. Then he shouted something harsh, utterly incoherent, and with a wild, furious gesture, threw the phone directly at Sophia. She barely caught it in time, her fingers closing around the warm, vibrating device. "Grandma?" she asked cautiously, bringing the phone to her ear, her voice trembling. "Are you still there?" "Yes, dear." Eleanor's voice was tired, but remarkably calm, the steady eye of the hurricane. "I'm afraid I couldn't assist your father. He's furious, as you can tell." Sophia watched Daniel gesticulate furiously as he spoke to the bewildered hotel manager, his body language a testament to his escalating panic and desperation. "I've truly never seen him like this," she whispered, a sense of genuine shock. "He's always had a temper, Ava," Eleanor sighed, a weary understanding in her voice. "Even as a small child, whenever something didn't go precisely according to his plan, he'd throw monumental tantrums." Daniel took out his cell phone again and, with trembling fingers, started frantically calling someone else, anyone. Judging by his agitated gestures and the grim contortion of his facial expression, the conversation was intensely tense, a desperate plea for a miracle. "I think he's trying desperately to find money," Sophia said, observing her father's frantic dialing and pleading tone. "He's calling people he knows, his influential friends." "I dare say that won't help him," Eleanor replied, her voice soft but firm, a statement of cold, hard fact. "It would require a truly substantial sum of money to cover all the expenses, immediately. Your father doesn't possess any friends wealthy enough to lend him $80,000 without prior preparation or collateral." $80,000? Sophia gasped, her eyes wide with unadulterated shock. "That is precisely what the entire wedding, including the honeymoon, cost. Your father and Serafina were so determined to impress Serafina's parents and their high-ranking friends. That kind of impression comes with an extraordinarily hefty price tag." The once magnificent hall was now almost completely empty, a ghostly shell. Most of the guests had already made their hasty, embarrassed exits from the hotel. The hotel staff, grim-faced, was putting away the last of the decorations and clearing the remaining dishes, the final, ignominious dismantling of a dream. Serafina returned to the hall, accompanied by her equally furious parents, her eyes red and swollen from prolonged crying, her once perfect makeup completely ruined, a tragic figure. She furiously reprimanded Daniel, who looked utterly lost, his shoulders slumped in complete, abject defeat. "It looks like their marriage won't last beyond tonight, Grandma," Sophia said sadly, her voice filled with a mournful empathy. "Serafina is absolutely furious. Her parents are too. If their relationship cannot survive this very first, significant test," Eleanor said philosophically, her voice carrying the quiet, profound wisdom of decades of experience, then it was never as strong or as genuine as it initially seemed. The hotel manager approached Daniel and, with a final, terse word, pointed pointedly to his watch, a non-negotiable demand for immediate departure. Daniel nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping even further, finally admitting total defeat. "We absolutely need to leave now, Grandma," Sophia said, her voice filled with a fresh urgency. "The manager is no longer asking, he is demanding." "Where are you staying tonight, dear?" Eleanor asked, her voice shifting to a tone of immediate, practical concern. "Do you have a secure place to stay?" "Yes, I have my own room in the same hotel," Sophia confirmed. "There's supposed to be a family brunch tomorrow morning, for the few remaining guests." "Oh, good. Okay, stay there. Do not, under any circumstances, return to your father's side tonight. He desperately needs time to cool down and reflect." Sophia nodded, though her grandmother, of course, couldn't see the gesture. "All right, grandmother, I will do exactly that." "And Ava, yes?" Eleanor's voice softened, imbued with a deep, unwavering affection. "I love you, darling, always. Whatever has happened between me and your father, it has absolutely no bearing, no effect whatsoever, on my profound feelings for you." Sophia felt a sudden, emotional lump in her throat, a surge of overwhelming gratitude and love. I love you too, Grandma, so much. I truly understand why you did what you did. I really do. They said their emotional goodbyes, and Sophia gently placed her phone back into her purse. The grand auditorium was now almost completely empty, a vast, echoing space. Daniel was standing alone by the main exit, his shoulders hunched, frantically typing something on his phone, a final, desperate attempt to salvage something, anything. Serafina and her parents had already stormed out, their figures disappearing into the night. The wedding, which was supposed to be the glorious beginning of a happy new life, was, for all intents and purposes, over before it could truly begin. Sophia walked quietly over to her father. "Papa," she said softly, her voice filled with a profound, almost heartbreaking compassion. "Let's get out of here. There's nothing left." He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers, and Sophia was utterly struck by the raw, bottomless despair in his gaze, a defeated, utterly broken look that made her heart ache. "She ruined everything," he rasped, his voice hoarse with rage and humiliation. "Out of pure, vindictive revenge." Sophia shook her head, a silent act of profound disagreement. "No, Papa. You ruined everything yourself. The moment you kicked your own mother, the woman who loved you most, out of your wedding." She then turned and walked resolutely towards the exit, leaving her father utterly alone in the desolate, empty banquet hall, surrounded by the pathetic remnants of his spectacularly failed party, a monument to his own overwhelming hubris. Eleanor woke up abruptly to a loud, insistent banging on her front door. At first, she thought it was merely a lingering, unwelcome fragment of her dream, a residual echo of the previous day's dramatic events, but then the pounding came again, louder, more insistent, infused with a palpable anger, a demand for immediate attention. Glancing at the bedside clock, she saw that it was only 7 o'clock in the morning. Who, she wondered with a detached curiosity, could possibly have arrived so early, so furiously? The knocking rapidly escalated into a relentless, rhythmic drumbeat, vibrating through the very foundations of her quiet home, and then, unmistakably, she heard Daniel's voice, muffled but seething with fury. "Mom. Open up right now. I know you're home, don't pretend." Eleanor slowly, deliberately, got out of bed, her movements unhurried. After yesterday's emotionally charged events, she felt strangely, profoundly calm, almost serene. There was no lingering fear, no gnawing regret, just a quiet, deep-seated confidence that she had, finally, done the unequivocally right thing, a sense of inner peace she hadn't known in decades. Slipping on her comfortable robe, she headed purposefully for the front door. Daniel continued to pound the door with such unrestrained force that it seemed destined to fly off its hinges. The neighbors, she knew, must undoubtedly be awake by now from the incessant noise. Well, let them hear, she thought, a spark of quiet defiance flickering within her. Let them hear what kind of son I have. She finally opened the door, pulling it inward slowly, and looked at Daniel in silence, her gaze steady, unwavering. He looked utterly awful. His meticulously chosen wedding suit was wrinkled and disheveled, his dark hair a chaotic mess, and his eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles, betraying a sleepless night. He probably had been up all night, consumed by rage and desperation. He jabbed his finger accusingly at her, pushing his way forcefully into the house, his face a mask of incandescent fury. "You completely ruined my life." Eleanor calmly closed the door behind him, the soft click a stark contrast to his raging entrance, and turned to face him. "Good morning, Daniel," she said in an even, almost annoyingly tranquil voice. "You're rather early." "Don't you dare," he almost shrieked, his voice cracking with barely contained rage. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend like nothing, absolutely nothing, happened." Eleanor calmly walked past him, heading directly for the kitchen. She needed her morning coffee before attempting to navigate this inevitable, volatile conversation, a moment to ground herself. "Oh, I remember exactly what happened, Daniel," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, as she meticulously filled the kettle with water. "You explicitly asked me to leave your wedding, and consequently, I cancelled the payments I was making for your entire lavish celebration." You meticulously planned the entire thing, didn't you? Daniel followed her, his voice rising, thick with accusation and bitterness. You secretly paid for all of this, on purpose, purely so you could get your vindictive revenge. You knew I didn't genuinely want you at the wedding. Eleanor carefully placed the kettle on the stove burner and turned to face her son, her gaze unwavering, unflinching. No, Daniel. When I first made arrangements with the agency 2 months ago, I had absolutely no idea, no inkling whatsoever, that you wouldn't invite me. What kind of mother, pray tell, would ever assume such a cruel thing from her own child? He remained silent for a brief moment, caught off guard by the raw honesty, but quickly regained his footing, his anger resurfacing. You should have said you were paying. It's manipulative, going behind my back like that. Would you have accepted my money, Daniel, if I had offered it to you directly? Eleanor challenged him, her voice laced with a quiet, knowing irony. Daniel averted his eyes, a faint flush rising on his cheeks, a telltale sign of his discomfort. That's a completely different question. The undeniable point is that you utterly ruined my wedding. You humiliated me in front of all the esteemed guests, in front of Serafina's parents, in front of everyone. The kettle whistled shrilly, a piercing sound that seemed to punctuate his rage. Eleanor calmly took it off the heat and began methodically making her coffee, her movements precise and unhurried. Do you want some, Daniel? She asked him, her politeness a subtle, maddening weapon. No. He slammed his fist onto the kitchen table, a loud, jarring thud. I didn't come here for coffee. I want to know, precisely, why you did this to me. Eleanor sat down at the table, her steaming cup held firmly in her hands, and looked at her son carefully, her eyes filled with a weary, profound wisdom. Why did I do that, Daniel? Let's turn the question around. Why did you kick me out of your own wedding? Why did you explicitly say I wasn't invited? Why were you so profoundly ashamed of me in front of your elite guests? I wasn't ashamed, he mumbled unconvincingly, his gaze shifting nervously, avoiding hers. It's just that the wedding was meticulously planned for a certain, specific circle. A circle your mother doesn't fit into, Eleanor finished for him, her voice cutting, utterly devoid of sympathy. Because I'm a simple woman who's worked with her hands all her life? Because I don't possess a prestigious university education or high society connections? Because I embarrass you with my humble background? Daniel looked as if he desperately wanted to object, to lash out, but he simply couldn't find the words, his arguments crumbling into dust. Finally, he just waved his hand dismissively, a gesture of defeat. It doesn't matter now. What's done is done. But you have to make it right, Mom. You have to fix this. Fix it? How, exactly? Eleanor raised her eyebrows, a hint of genuine curiosity in her voice. Return the payments, he blurted out, a desperate, raw plea. Call the bank, the agency, all the suppliers. Tell them it was some kind of colossal mistake, a misunderstanding. Eleanor sipped her coffee, feeling its inherent bitterness on her tongue, a taste that perfectly mirrored the current moment. It's far too late, Daniel. The money has already been returned to my account. I received definitive confirmation from the bank last night. Then make new payments, he instantly retorted, springing up from his chair and beginning to pace frantically around the kitchen, like a caged animal. Serafina is utterly hysterical. Her parents are threatening to completely cut all ties with us. We had to spend the entire night in a cheap, disgusting motel because the hotel vehemently refused to give us a room. Eleanor watched him, a distant, almost detached look in her eyes, remembering the little boy who used to thrash around the room with such furious abandon when he didn't immediately get the toy he desired. So many years had passed, and yet, fundamentally, nothing had changed. Where were you planning to spend your honeymoon, Daniel? She asked, her voice calm, steering the conversation into entirely unexpected, uncomfortable territory. Daniel stopped his frantic pacing and looked at her suspiciously, thrown completely off guard. What does that possibly have to do with anything? Italy, 2 weeks. The flight leaves tomorrow. I mean, it was supposed to be tomorrow. And who, pray tell, paid for this extravagant trip? She pressed, her gaze unwavering, direct. He frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion. Me, of course. Serafina and I meticulously paid for it ourselves. No, Daniel, Eleanor shook her head slowly, a quiet, devastating negation. I paid for that too. Through the very same agency. It was all meticulously included in the total package. Daniel froze, his face changing dramatically, the last vestiges of his anger draining away, replaced by a dawning, horrifying comprehension. He sank slowly into the chair across from her, as if his legs could no longer support his own weight, utterly deflated. What do you mean? His voice sounded quieter, a fragile whisper, a raw vulnerability. What's the total amount you're referring to? Eleanor sighed, the immense weight of the revelation hanging heavily in the suddenly quiet air. $86,400, Daniel. That is precisely what your entire wedding and your luxurious honeymoon in Italy ultimately cost. And it was all, every single penny, paid for by me. He stared at her, his eyes widening in profound disbelief, then a slow, dawning horror. It's utterly impossible. You couldn't have. Where on earth did you get that kind of money? I sold the business 5 years ago, remember? Eleanor replied calmly, her voice even. For $2,300,000. I invested the vast majority of it, and I've been living comfortably off the interest. I can certainly afford to spend some of it on my only son's wedding, can't I? Daniel sat there, completely stunned by this unexpected torrent of information, his carefully constructed perception of her shattering into irreparable fragments. Eleanor could visibly see his mind frantically reassessing the entire situation, processing the seismic shift. His mother, whom he had always condescendingly thought of as just an old lady with a modest pension, had, in a single, devastating revelation, turned out to be an independently wealthy woman, capable of effortlessly paying for a lavish, extravagant wedding and a luxurious vacation in Italy. Why didn't you tell me? He finally asked, his voice subdued, a genuine hint of confusion mixed with a dawning shame. Why did you hide the fact that you possessed such substantial money? I wasn't precisely hiding it, Daniel, Eleanor answered calmly, her voice utterly devoid of accusation. You simply never bothered to ask. You were only ever interested in the precise amount of money you could potentially extract from me, remember? That dubious startup venture of your buddies? You desperately wanted me to invest a staggering $200,000 without bothering to explain exactly what it was about, without any real business plan. It was a truly promising project, he weakly defended himself, a faint, flickering spark of his old bravado. We could have easily tripled our investment, Mom. Or we could have lost every single cent, Eleanor countered, her voice unwavering. I, on the other hand, chose more reliable, more secure options. And as you can clearly see, Daniel, I did not fail. Daniel looked visibly confused, his anger slowly, perceptibly giving way to a profound bewilderment, and, surprisingly, a reluctant flicker of respect. He was looking at her with entirely new eyes, as if for the very first time he was truly seeing her not merely as his mother, an aging figure from his past, but as an independent, capable, and profoundly successful woman, a formidable force he had so completely, so disastrously, underestimated. This fragile, fleeting moment of genuine enlightenment, however, did not last long. Within a minute, his face reverted to the calculating, self-serving expression Eleanor knew all too well. He leaned across the table toward her, his eyes narrowed, calculating. Mom, his voice became unervingly soft, almost affectionate, a transparent, calculated attempt at manipulation. I completely understand that you were deeply offended, and you absolutely had every right to be. I was undeniably wrong not to invite you. It was a grave mistake on my part. Eleanor waited silently for him to continue, her expression impassive. It was a predictable tactic she knew equally well. First, a feigned admission of fault, then a swift, seamless transition to the selfish request. But you surely don't want my marriage to begin with such a monumental scandal, do you? He continued, his voice a smooth, persuasive hum layered with subtle pressure. Think of Serafina, Mom. It's truly not her fault. And consider Serafina's parents, they are incredibly influential people, very well connected. They can undoubtedly help both me, and even you, in the future. How, pray tell, could they possibly help an old woman like me, Daniel? Eleanor asked, a touch of pointed irony in her voice, a subtle test he utterly failed to perceive. Arthur has deep connections in all areas. Daniel exclaimed, missing the sarcasm entirely. If you ever needed a good doctor, a place in the absolute best nursing home, for instance. Eleanor couldn't help but laugh aloud, a short, sharp, bitter sound utterly devoid of humor. Nursing home? Really, Daniel? I'm 68 years old, in robust health, and with more than enough capital to live very comfortably for the entire rest of my life. Why on earth would I need a nursing home? He was momentarily embarrassed, a flush rising on his cheeks, but quickly regrouped, his ambition overriding any fleeting discomfort. I was merely offering an example, Mom. The crucial point is, we would all, undoubtedly, be far better off if you simply rectified the situation. Pay the money back, and we can organize the wedding dinner all over again, with you in attendance. I'll personally invite you, Mom, put you in the place of honor, at the head table. Eleanor set down her now empty cup with a definitive click and slowly, deliberately, shook her head. No, Daniel. The money will not be returned for the wedding. His face changed instantly. The fragile mask of benevolence fell away entirely, giving way to raw, unadulterated anger, a terrifying transformation. What do you mean, no? You simply cannot just say no like that. This is my marriage. My entire reputation is on the line, Mom. I've already handled the money, Daniel, Eleanor said calmly, her voice unwavering, completely unshaken by his fury. It will now go directly to Ava's education. Daniel froze, his eyes wide with a stunned disbelief. What? Last night, Eleanor continued, her voice clear and precise, I opened a comprehensive trust fund in Ava's name. That $80,000 will be entirely available to pay for her education, college, her master's degree, perhaps even a doctorate. She's 23, Daniel, she's got her entire life ahead of her, a brilliant future. You can't do that, he was utterly outraged, his voice cracking with fury. That money was specifically meant for my wedding. It was my money. It was intended for your happiness, Daniel, Eleanor corrected him, her voice firm, unwavering. But you made it abundantly clear that your happiness did not include me. So, I found a far better, more deserving use for it. Daniel jumped up from his chair, his face crimson with incandescent anger, his hands clenching into furious fists, trembling with impotent rage. You're doing this purely out of spite. Out of revenge. You want to completely ruin my life, don't you? Eleanor stood up as well, meeting her son's furious gaze directly, her own eyes filled with a quiet, steely resolve. No, Daniel. I am doing this because for the very first time in years, I have decided to respect myself. For decades, I have tolerated your blatant neglect, your profound shame for me, your constant, relentless requests for money without so much as a single word of thanks or genuine gratitude. I allowed you to use me, to exploit me, desperately hoping that one day, you would finally see me not only as a convenient source of financial support, but as a loving mother who adored you and deserved your respect. Eleanor paused, feeling the familiar sting of tears rising in her throat, a burning sensation, but she fiercely held them back. But you, Daniel, crossed a definitive line yesterday. Kicking your own mother, the woman who gave you life, out of your wedding, is not merely disrespectful, it is an act of profound cruelty. And I, Daniel, will not stand for it any longer. Daniel stood breathing hard, his hands clenched tightly into fists, trembling with barely controlled fury. You're going to bitterly regret this, he snarled through gritted teeth, his voice a low, menacing growl. I swear to God, you absolutely will. The only thing I regret, Daniel, Eleanor replied, her voice soft but firm, utterly unshaken, is the precious years I spent allowing you to manipulate me, to exploit my love. But that, Daniel, is unequivocally over. You. He gasped with an overwhelming, inarticulate rage, utterly unable to find the words to express his fury, his face contorted in a grotesque mask. What on earth am I going to tell Serafina? Her parents? They are demanding an immediate explanation. Tell them the unvarnished truth, Daniel, Eleanor shrugged, a gesture of profound indifference. Tell them that you kicked your own mother out of the wedding, and she, in turn, withdrew her financial support. Or, alternatively, you could simply make something up. You were always remarkably inventive with excuses, weren't you? Daniel, with a wild, furious cry, grabbed an empty coffee cup off the table and threw it to the floor with immense force. The porcelain shattered into 100 pieces, scattering fragments and coffee grounds across the kitchen linoleum, a violent, symbolic act. This isn't over, he hissed, his eyes blazing with fury. I'll find a way to make you pay for this, Mom. And the money for Ava's education, I will contest that trust fund. She's my daughter. I have every legal right to that money. You can certainly try, Daniel, Eleanor said calmly, her voice even, completely unperturbed by his outburst. But the trust is legally impeccable. My lawyer made absolutely sure of that. The money unequivocally belongs to Ava, and neither you nor I can take it from her. His face contorted with impotent rage, a terrifying, grotesque mask of unadulterated fury and frustration. He spun around abruptly and stormed towards the exit, furiously sweeping everything he could get his hands on off the kitchen countertop, the salt shaker, the sugar bowl, a small vase of fake flowers, sending them crashing to the floor. I don't want to ever see you again, he bellowed, turning around in the doorway, his voice thick with venomous hatred. You are not my mother. You've never, ever, been a real mother to me. Those cruel words, uttered with such profound malice, should have deeply wounded her, pierced her to the very core of her being. But strangely, Eleanor felt only a profound, liberating relief. It was as if the very last, frayed thread tying her to a toxic, draining, emotionally abusive relationship had finally, definitively, snapped, leaving her utterly free. Goodbye, Daniel, Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely a whisper, a farewell to a version of her son who no longer existed. He slammed the door behind him with such incredible force that the very glass in the windows rattled violently in their frames. She heard him angrily start his car and drive off with a high-pitched squeal of tires, a final, screeching declaration of his impotent rage. Eleanor sank back down into her chair, looking with a detached interest at the scattered shards of the cup on the floor. Symbolic, she mused. Their relationship, too, was utterly shattered, broken beyond any hope of repair. It was impossible to put it back together again. But instead of bitterness, instead of crushing despair, she felt a strange, profound calm. For the first time in years, she was doing what she truly believed was right, not constantly adjusting herself to her son's unrealistic expectations, not sacrificing her precious dignity for his fleeting whims. The insistent ringing of her phone snapped her out of her deep musings, pulling her back to the present. Ava's name, accompanied by a small, worried emoji, popped up on the screen. Eleanor sighed, a small, contented sound, and answered it. Grandma? Ava's voice sounded worried, a tremor of concern evident. Are you okay? Daddy just called me, and he was absolutely furious, screaming into the phone. I'm fine, dear, Eleanor answered, her voice calm and reassuring. Your father came by. We talked. He's upset, naturally, but he'll eventually get over it. He said that you gave the money from the wedding, all of it, to me for your education. Is that truly, honestly, true, Grandma? Eleanor smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Yes, darling, it's absolutely true. I've set up a trust fund in your name. That money will be entirely available to pay for your tuition, your college, your graduate school, whatever academic path you choose to pursue. But, Grandma. Ava sounded utterly shocked, her voice filled with disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. That's a truly huge amount of money. I can't possibly. You can, my love, Eleanor interrupted her gently, her voice firm yet tender. And it's the very best investment I could possibly make. You are a brilliant, talented girl, Ava. Use that money to get an outstanding education, to build a magnificent career, to become truly independent, to forge your own path. I don't know what to say. Eleanor could hear the unmistakable sound of tears in Ava's voice, a mixture of profound gratitude and overwhelming emotion. "Thank you, Grandma. But I'm genuinely afraid that Daddy will stop talking to you altogether now. He's so prideful." "That, Ava, is entirely his choice," Eleanor sighed, a hint of weary resignation in her voice. "I will always be ready to reconcile if he truly, genuinely wants to. But I will no longer tolerate any more disrespect or neglect from him." "I understand, Grandma," Ava said quietly, her voice firm with newfound conviction. I'm on your side, Grandmother. What he did at the wedding was truly awful, unforgivable." They talked for some time longer. Ava revealed that Serafina and her parents had left the hotel early that morning, abandoning Daniel alone at the motel, refusing any further contact. It seemed that not only did the wedding not take place, but the marriage itself was now gravely in jeopardy, perhaps irrevocably fractured. After talking to her beloved granddaughter, Eleanor set about methodically cleaning up the shattered cup shards and the chaotic mess Daniel had made in her kitchen, a tangible representation of his destructive rage. As she calmly swept the floor, she found herself pondering the future, her own future, with a growing sense of anticipation. Perhaps it truly was time for a profound change. Wilmington, with its myriad painful memories and lingering ghosts of a past she no longer wished to inhabit, felt stifling. Maybe it was worth moving somewhere entirely new, embracing a completely different environment, starting a truly fresh, unburdened chapter of life. After she finished cleaning, leaving the kitchen spotless once more, she sat down at her computer and, with a newfound sense of purpose, opened up a real estate listing website. Just to look, to explore the endless possibilities, the myriad options stretching before her. Nothing specific yet, just allowing her thoughts to wander, to contemplate the exciting potential of new beginnings. The phone rang again, pulling her from her reverie. This time, it was Richard from the bank. "Mrs. Maeve, I'm calling to let you know that the trust fund in Ava Maeve's name has been successfully executed. All the meticulous paperwork is in order, the money has been securely transferred. You'll simply need to stop by the branch to sign a few final papers." "Thank you, Richard," Eleanor replied, a genuine warmth in her voice. "I'll stop by this afternoon." And he continued, a note of amusement in his tone, "Your son, Daniel, called the bank earlier, tirelessly trying to find out the precise details of the trust, repeatedly stating it was some kind of mistake, and that you would never do such a thing. Eleanor sighed, a familiar, resigned sound. "There's no mistake, Richard. The trust was meticulously set up on my explicit initiative and is entirely in accordance with my wishes and legal instructions." "That's precisely what I told him, Mrs. Maeve," repeatedly, Richard chuckled. But he was quite persistent. He even threatened legal action against the bank. "Let him threaten, Richard," Eleanor replied calmly, a profound sense of inner peace in her voice. "He has no legitimate grounds whatsoever to challenge my disposition of my own funds." They finished talking, and Eleanor returned to eagerly looking at real estate listings. Now, however, her search had broadened. She was looking not only at charming houses in other cities across the country, but also at luxurious cruise tours, exotic destinations, and adventurous travel packages. All her life, she had secretly dreamed of seeing the world, of exploring distant lands and vibrant cultures, but she'd consistently put that cherished dream off, first for her family, then for the relentless demands of building her business, then, perhaps most detrimentally, for Daniel and his insatiable needs and expectations. It was, she realized with profound clarity, unequivocally time to start living for herself. And for the very first time in years, the thought didn't make her feel a flicker of guilt. It felt liberating, empowering, a true awakening. Sunlight poured generously onto the spacious terrace of her new house in Savannah, Georgia, warm and inviting, dappling the flagstones with golden light. Eleanor sat comfortably in a rustic wicker chair, sipping a tall glass of icy lemonade, feeling the cool condensation against her fingertips, and watching the magnificent magnolias sway gently in the soft breeze, their creamy white blossoms exuding a sweet, intoxicating perfume. It had been 4 transformative months since that tumultuous day her life had been so spectacularly turned upside down, the day of Daniel's utterly failed wedding. Those months, a whirlwind of practical hassles and profound, long overdue decisions, had flown by in a blur. The sale of her beloved house in Wilmington was surprisingly swift, almost miraculously so. It went under contract in just 3 days, at a price significantly above market value. It was as if fate itself, with a benevolent hand, was actively pushing her to embrace this radical change, clearing every obstacle from her path towards a new beginning. The search for a new home had taken a little longer, a careful, thoughtful process, but when she first laid eyes on this small but exquisitely cozy one-story house, nestled comfortably in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Savannah, with its charming terrace and verdant garden, she immediately, unequivocally, knew, this is precisely what I need. Moving at 68 would undoubtedly seem like sheer madness to many people. Her former neighbors in Wilmington, conventional and set in their ways, had shaken their heads in disapproval, offering unsolicited advice that in her old age, it was undeniably better to stay where everything was familiar, where routine provided a comforting, albeit stifling, predictability. But Eleanor felt, with a profound certainty, that it was now, with the vast majority of her life behind her, that she most desperately needed a fundamental change. She yearned for new air to breathe, new faces to meet, new opportunities to embrace. She spent her first few weeks in Savannah meticulously organizing her new home. She purchased all new furniture, hung fresh, vibrant curtains, acquired charming new dishes. Absolutely everything was new, nothing carried the lingering echoes of her old life. It was like starting completely from scratch, a profound cleansing. Then, with an eager, curious spirit, she began to explore the captivating city itself, its sprawling, lush parks, its fascinating historic museums, its quaint, inviting restaurants, its charming, independent stores. She signed up for watercolor classes at the local community center, a joyful reconnection. As a young girl, she had deeply loved to paint, a passion she had regretfully abandoned when she began to relentlessly develop her accounting business, sacrificing artistic inclination for financial security. Now, decades later, the brush felt instantly familiar and comfortable in her hand, like greeting an old, cherished friend. Her phone vibrated, signaling an incoming message. It was a text from Ava. She'd sent a picture of her latest student project, some kind of elaborate, intricately detailed architectural model, a testament to her blossoming talent and hard work. The caption beneath the photo read, simply, "Got the highest grade." Followed by, "Thanks for the opportunity to attend graduate school, Grandma. Couldn't have done it without you." Eleanor smiled, a deep, contented smile that reached her eyes. After the dramatic, infamous wedding story, Ava had, with renewed purpose, transferred into a prestigious master's program in architecture, finally fulfilling a long-time dream she had previously considered utterly unattainable due to the prohibitive cost of tuition. Now, thanks to the thoughtfully established trust fund Eleanor had created for her, Ava could concentrate fully, unequivocally, on her demanding studies without the crushing burden of financial worry. Ava was, truly, the only person from her previous life with whom Eleanor kept in regular, meaningful contact. They called every 2 or 3 days, exchanged heartfelt messages, and just last month, Ava had even flown down to Savannah to visit Eleanor for a delightful weekend. They had walked together through historic downtown Savannah, marveling at the architecture, lingered over coffee in cozy cafes, sharing stories, and discussed Ava's demanding studies and Eleanor's invigorating new life. At some point, the conversation, inevitably, gently touched upon Daniel. "Dad's still pretty mad, Grandma," Ava had said then, looking thoughtfully into her coffee cup, her voice tinged with a familiar resignation. "He rarely talks about you, but whenever I happen to mention your name, his face visibly stiffens, and he just changes the subject." Eleanor nodded slowly. That, she knew, was entirely to be expected. Daniel had never been particularly adept at forgiveness. Even as a small child, he could stubbornly sulk for weeks over the slightest perceived offense. What about his relationship with Serafina? Eleanor inquired, a flicker of genuine curiosity. Did they finally get married after all that chaos? Ava wrinkled her nose, a slight look of distaste. "Yes, Grandma, if you could even call it a wedding." It was honestly pathetic. She then recounted, in vivid detail, what had transpired after the initial, disastrous ceremony had collapsed. Serafina was, understandably, furious, and her parents had vehemently demanded that the engagement be immediately broken off. But Daniel, with a desperate, persuasive charm, had somehow managed to convince them to grant him one more chance, promising to hastily organize a new, albeit more modest, wedding, one that would still, somehow, be worthy of their family standing. The subsequent, second ceremony had taken place just 3 weeks after the first catastrophic attempt. Instead of the opulent, exclusive Belvedere Grand Hotel ballroom, it was a small, rather nondescript restaurant on the humble outskirts of Wilmington. Instead of 100 esteemed guests, there were just 30 of their closest friends and family, their faces a mixture of awkwardness and pity. Instead of a renowned live band and dancing until the early hours of the morning, there was a makeshift DJ with a laptop playing generic background music for 2 short hours. And instead of the luxurious, 2-week honeymoon in Italy, it was a mere weekend getaway at the nearest, somewhat run-down, coastal resort. It was so incredibly embarrassing, Grandma, Ava recalled, her voice still resonating with discomfort and a lingering sense of shame. All the guests, everyone, knew about the complete fiasco of the first wedding. Everyone was openly whispering. Serafina's parents were sitting there with such grim, stony faces, as if they were attending a funeral, not a wedding celebration. And Serafina herself was smiling so forcefully, so unnaturally, it looked like her jaw hurt. And Dad looked like he literally wanted to fall through the ground, to disappear entirely. Eleanor could vividly imagine the humiliating scene. Daniel, who had spent his entire life striving desperately to impress others, to project an image of effortless success and sophistication, must have felt utterly, irrevocably humiliated, his meticulously constructed world crumbling around him publicly. You know what's truly ironic, Grandma? Ava continued, a faint, bitter laugh escaping her. In his speech, Dad profusely thanked Serafina's parents for their generous financial support. He lied, Grandma, outright, right in front of everyone, as if they had paid for the first wedding, not you. Eleanor shook her head slowly, a wry, knowing smile touching her lips. Typical Daniel. He would far rather lie, Ava, than admit a truth that might make him look bad, that might tarnish his precious image. And Serafina, how does she feel about your father now, really? I don't know for sure, Grandma, Ava shrugged, a hint of sadness in her eyes. They're still together, but something fundamental has definitely changed between them. Serafina is always, constantly, pointing out his faults to Daddy, as if he perpetually owes her something, as if he's always in her debt. And he's gotten kind of shy, almost timid, lost his usual swagger, his self-confident air. Ava's voice sounded genuinely sympathetic, and Eleanor knew, with a mother's intuition, that for all his profound faults, Daniel was still her father, and Ava loved him, even though she saw his glaring weaknesses with a clear, discerning eye. Did he ever ask about me? Eleanor asked, a flicker of hope she quickly suppressed, a question she had to ask. No, Ava shook her head. Not directly. But he knows we communicate, Grandma. Sometimes, when I'm on the phone with you and he's nearby, I notice him subtly listening. I truly think, deep down, he misses you, Grandma. It's just that his overwhelming pride won't ever let him truly admit it, not yet. Eleanor didn't comment on that assumption. There were enough illusions, enough unspoken truths, in their complicated family dynamic, and she had no desire to create new ones. If Daniel genuinely missed her, if he truly desired reconciliation, he knew precisely how to contact her. Her phone number hadn't changed, a constant in a rapidly shifting world. Memories of that insightful conversation with Ava slowly, gracefully melted away, and Eleanor returned to the tranquil present moment, to her serene terrace in Savannah, where the sun was already beginning its majestic descent, painting the sky in fiery hues, casting long, peaceful shadows. She finished her iced lemonade, enjoying the last lingering drops of coolness, and returned inside the house. There were several important papers scattered on her polished table that demanded her immediate attention: glossy cruise company brochures, a pristine booking confirmation, a meticulously prepared list of essential items she needed for her upcoming adventure. In precisely 3 days, she was embarking on a Caribbean cruise, a 2-week, luxurious voyage on a magnificent ocean liner, with planned stops on several exotic, sun-drenched islands. A cherished dream she had harbored and nurtured for decades was, finally, gloriously becoming a tangible reality. When she was younger, Robert and she had often talked, with wistful longing, about such a trip, someday, when the business is stable, when Daniel grows up. But Robert, tragically, died far too young, without ever setting foot on the warm sands of Caribbean beaches. And Eleanor, burdened by responsibility, kept postponing and postponing this profound dream, first because of the relentless demands of her demanding work, then because of her unwavering obligations to her son. Now, she was finally, gloriously, doing it, solely for her. The trip was, undeniably, expensive, a lavish indulgence, but she could easily afford it. After successfully selling her beloved house in Wilmington and purchasing her charming new home in Savannah, she had a substantial amount of capital comfortably left over. In addition, her meticulously planned investments continued to generate a steady, comfortable income. She could, now, afford these small luxuries, these grand adventures, without a single flicker of worry about her future financial security. Of course, there were fleeting moments of doubt, a subtle, insidious voice in her head, suspiciously similar to Daniel's, that whispered, "What if you get sick? Who will take care of you in a foreign city, so far from everything familiar? Wouldn't it be far better to simply save your money for a rainy day, for future uncertainties?" But Eleanor had, over these past few months, learned to decisively silence that nagging, fear-mongering voice. Life, she realized with a profound clarity, was far too short to constantly put happiness on hold, to defer joy indefinitely. Her new financial advisor, a bright, confident young woman named Tamara Jenkins, fully supported her in this newfound pursuit of self-fulfillment. Mrs. Maeve, Tamara had confidently stated at their very first meeting, her voice warm and encouraging, "With your substantial capital and your sensible approach to spending, you can absolutely afford to live life to the fullest, to embrace every adventure, and still maintain a robust financial safety cushion. You've worked incredibly hard to build that remarkable wealth. Now, it is undeniably time to enjoy the rich fruits of your labor, to savor every moment." Eleanor carefully laid out on the table the various items she planned to take with her on the eagerly anticipated cruise: a vibrant, new swimsuit, the first time she'd bought a new one in years, a small Triumph, stylish sunglasses, a wide-brimmed sun hat, and a sophisticated new camera. Next to it, an open book of basic Spanish phrases lay, its pages marked. She'd started learning the language 2 weeks ago, determined to communicate at least a little with the local islanders, to truly immerse herself in their culture. Her phone vibrated again, a cheerful buzz. This time it was Martha, her new friend from the watercolor painting group. They'd arranged to have a celebratory dinner together before Eleanor left for her grand adventure. "Eleanor, are you ready? I'll be at your place in 20 minutes sharp." "Yes, Martha, I'm ready," Eleanor replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "I'm waiting for you." She went to change, her movements light, almost buoyant. She took out of her closet a light, flowing floral dress, another recent, vibrant purchase she adored. She wouldn't have dared wear something so bright, so youthful, so unequivocally joyful, in Wilmington. She would have been consumed by the fear of her old neighbors' disapproving, leering stares, of Daniel's inevitable, cutting, ironic comments, his endless judgment. But here in Savannah, she was truly free of those debilitating fears, unburdened by the expectations of a past life. No one knew her as Daniel's mother, or the Maeve widow who keeps to herself. She was simply Eleanor, a vibrant new resident in town, taking painting lessons, embracing a new language, and embarking on grand adventures. Martha arrived precisely at the appointed time, a whirlwind of energetic enthusiasm, an energetic 60-year-old woman with a chic short haircut and an infectious, booming laugh. She was the complete antithesis of her former, cautious friends from Wilmington, divorced, without children. She had fearlessly traveled halfway around the world and worked successfully as a freelance photographer, a truly free, uninhibited spirit. "Oh, what an absolutely lovely dress, Eleanor," she exclaimed, her eyes widening with genuine admiration when Eleanor opened the door. "It looks simply marvelous on you. You'll undoubtedly make quite a splash in the Caribbean." They went to a small, charming seafood restaurant nestled comfortably near Eleanor's house, its aroma of fresh-caught fish welcoming. At dinner, Martha, with her characteristic vivacity, peppered Eleanor with questions about the upcoming cruise, offering invaluable advice gleaned from her own extensive travels. She had, in fact, visited some of the very islands on Eleanor's itinerary. "Be absolutely sure to try the local rum in Jamaica, Eleanor," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief, "and whatever you do, don't be afraid to haggle in the bustling markets. It's an essential part of the local culture, a fun game." Eleanor listened to her with a genuine smile, making mental notes, absorbing every piece of practical wisdom. It was one of those rare, precious moments when she felt the profound contrast between her restrictive past and her liberating present life particularly keenly. Before, such a casual, adventurous conversation would have seemed utterly fantastic, an impossible dream. Eleanor Maeve, haggling in a vibrant Jamaican market? Unthinkable. Now, it was a very real, very exciting, imminent possibility. "What about your son, Eleanor?" Martha suddenly asked, her voice softening, a moment of unexpected seriousness. "Is he still out of touch?" Eleanor sighed, a brief, weary sound. Martha knew the general history of her conflict with Daniel, not all the intricate details, but the general outline. "No, he hasn't been in touch. And I genuinely don't expect that to change anytime soon." "His profound loss, then," Martha shrugged, a gesture of empathetic understanding. "You know, Eleanor, my own mother always wisely said, children are raised for the world, not simply for themselves. Your son is living his life, and you, my dear, have every undeniable right to fully live yours, with joy and freedom." Eleanor nodded slowly, feeling a deep, quiet gratitude for those insightful words. It was precisely the kind of unwavering support she had so desperately missed before, practical, unsentimental, recognizing reality for what it truly was, without judgment or false comfort. After dinner, Martha and Eleanor took a leisurely stroll through evening Savannah, bathed in the soft, golden glow of street lamps. The city was breathtakingly beautiful at dusk, old, stately houses with intricate wrought iron balconies, picturesque squares with bubbling fountains, ancient, majestic trees draped gracefully with Spanish moss, like ethereal, ghostly curtains. They reached the Savannah riverfront, where the smaller tourist ships were docked, their lights twinkling on the dark, placid water. "In 3 days, I'll be on a much bigger ship than these," Eleanor said, looking out at the illuminated riverboats, a thrill of eager anticipation running through her veins. "And that, Eleanor, will be just the very beginning," Martha declared with a knowing wink, her eyes sparkling. "After the Caribbean, there's the Mediterranean, then Alaska, then Scandinavia. The whole world awaits. Don't get ahead of yourself, Martha." Eleanor laughed, a genuine, joyful sound, full of newfound lightness. "Let me successfully handle this cruise first." They said their emotional goodbyes outside Eleanor's house, a warm, heartfelt farewell. Martha hugged her tightly and promised to drop her at the airport on the exciting day of departure. "And bring me back a magnet from Barbados," she shouted cheerfully as she got into her car, her voice carrying through the quiet night. "I already have a collection started." Back home, Eleanor checked her meticulously prepared list of things for the cruise one more time. Everything was ready, perfectly in order. She sat in a comfortable chair by the window, looking out at her serene night garden, softly lit by a nearby street lamp, its shadows dancing gently in the warm breeze. Her thoughts, unbidden, drifted back to Daniel. She'd last heard from Ava 2 weeks ago. According to her granddaughter, Daniel had indeed taken a new job, still within the same cutthroat insurance field, but with a significantly smaller company and a noticeably lower salary. Serafina, predictably, wasn't happy, believing it was a significant step backwards in his meticulously planned career trajectory. But Daniel himself, surprisingly, seemed to be accepting it with a newfound, quiet resignation. "He's gotten quieter," Grandma, Ava had observed. "Less boastful, more realistic, actually." Perhaps the harsh lessons of the spectacularly failed wedding hadn't gone entirely to waste. Perhaps Daniel had finally begun to realize, with painful clarity, that ostentatious luxury, endless pretense, and the desperate desire to constantly impress others were not, in the grand scheme of things, the most important aspects of a truly fulfilling life. Or perhaps, Eleanor mused, it was merely her enduring maternal illusions, her stubborn, inherent desire to believe that her son, despite his profound flaws, still possessed the inherent potential for genuine growth and positive change. Either way, Eleanor had made the firm, resolute decision to no longer allow his chronic problems, his endless demands, and his dismissive attitude towards her to define her own precious life. For far too many years, she had lived her existence with a constant, stifling eye on his fleeting opinions, his insatiable needs, his capricious whims. That painful, exhausting chapter of her life was definitively, irrevocably closed. She reached over to her nightstand and pulled out a single, cherished photo album, the only tangible thing, besides her clothes and some personal papers, that she'd brought from her old home, a deliberate choice to leave the past behind. She flipped open the album, stopping at a particular picture taken 36 years ago, her, Robert, and little Daniel, all beaming, on a sun-drenched beach. They were all smiling, genuinely happy and utterly carefree, a perfect, poignant snapshot of a life that once was, a golden moment frozen in time. "I hope you'd approve, Robert," she whispered softly, running her finger gently over her beloved husband's smiling face in the picture, a silent, heartfelt conversation across the divide of time. "I hope you'd say I deserve this new life, this profound sense of peace and freedom." She carefully closed the album and returned it reverently to its place. Tomorrow was the very last day of preparations for her exciting trip. She had to pick up the foreign currency from the bank, meticulously check all her travel documents once again, and finally finish packing her suitcases. And in precisely 3 days, she would be standing proudly on the expansive deck of a huge, magnificent cruise liner, watching the familiar coastline of America gradually disappear into the distant horizon, and a vast, boundless ocean of thrilling possibilities open up invitingly in front of her. This, she imagined with a surge of joyous anticipation, was how her new life would unfold, a life unburdened by the crushing weight of past offenses, free from the heavy burden of unjustified expectations, liberated from the perpetual need to constantly prove her inherent worth. Just a life filled with exhilarating new impressions, enriching new acquaintances, and thrilling new discoveries. Her own life, which she had been so patiently, so selflessly, putting off for so incredibly long, but which had, finally, gloriously, truly begun. Before going to bed, Eleanor stepped out onto her new terrace, inhaling deeply. The Savannah night sky was studded with countless, shimmering stars, like diamonds scattered on black velvet. A light, warm breeze brought the intoxicating scent of jasmine from a neighbor's garden, sweet and pervasive. She inhaled deeply, feeling a profound sense of calm and a deep, comforting reassurance flooding through every fiber of her being. "Thank you," she whispered softly to someone she didn't know, to the vast, indifferent universe, perhaps to fate, perhaps to herself. "Thank you for this precious second chance. At 68, I was finally, truly living the life I had always wanted, deep down. And there was so much more to see, to feel, to know. A brand new life was just beginning, and the possibilities were endless."